Greetings. This is a lecture on motivation theories, and while this may be a review for many of you, motivation theories are an essential part of understanding how we go about managing our employees. I'm going to go right into the material. A lot of this is fairly self-explanatory, but I want to kind of go through each of the slides and sort of highlight some of the things that I think you need to pay attention to. With respect to the first slide on motivation, you can see that there is the definition right there up front, that motivation is a set of processes that arouse, direct, and maintain human behavior towards obtaining some goal. So the situation is with motivation that something has to get your attention. It has to arouse you. You have to be interested in it, and you have to want it. So the arousal is really important. It has to gain your attention. From there, then you want to be directed in a certain area towards achieving something. So something gets your attention, but then if you want that reward, if you want whatever it is that excites you, you've got to be directed in a way to achieve that. And then, of course, the burst of energy that we use to achieve something has to be maintained over time. And when we think about this in the context of organizations, we want people to behave in a particular way, not just today, not just tomorrow, but every day. And as I said in the first day, people are the only resource that wake up in the morning and decide they don't want to go to work, or they don't want to behave in the way that we need them to behave. And we need to use motivation theories to get them to do that. So our job as managers is to figure out what's going to arouse them, what's going to get their attention, what they're going to be interested in. Then our next goal is to give them the clarity of direction, of responsibility, making sure they've got the resources to do the job, that they understand what the job entails through job descriptions, and then ultimately provide rewards that they are going to want and desire so that we can keep them maintaining the level of performance that we want over time. And the only way we can do that is through reinforcement theories and through different types of awards and rewards, which we will get into as we talk a little bit more about this. Can you motivate workers as a manager or a leader? Not really. What you can do is create a context. You don't get to push a button and suddenly the person becomes motivated. So you don't create the motivation. You create the context within which the employee decides that they're motivated or not. The motivation comes from within the individual. So this is where that struggle is for a lot of managers when they feel like, oh my God, I've done everything that I can. Why aren't they motivated? Well, because you've not really tapped into what motivates that particular person or this particular person. Maybe this person is really excited about the project they want to work on, but they don't like the rewards. This person hates the project, but loves the rewards. So, you're going to get different behaviors and different responses based on how much they are aroused, how much clarity they've gotten in terms of how well they've been directed, and the kind of reinforcement they've gotten to maintain those behaviors over time. And we maintain those behaviors, as I said, through different rewards, whether they are paychecks, or we can maintain a behavior by having random drug tests, for example. We know for a fact that if someone gets randomly tested time and time and time and time again, lo and behold, they will continue to stay off of drugs, because they never know when the drug test is going to come. Okay, so the next comment is, so the basic two questions that we have to deal with is what motivates us and how does it happen? The things that motivate us are fairly commonly researched. Most people have a good understanding of the types of things that motivate people, whether it's money or connectedness with people, or the desire to do something greater in their lives. We call that self-actualization. There's a host of different things that will motivate us. And so we'll talk a little bit about the common theories about the
types of things that motivate people and how we can expect that reaction to happen. In terms of the process theories are looking at what happens in our brains, or what happens sort of within the little black box of, I do something, a little black box of things occurs, and then motivated behaviors happens afterwards. And so what we're looking at is, how does it happen? What is the process that occurs within the individual to help them to make a decision whether or not they want to be motivated? And that's where we'll be getting at some of that information as we move through the slides.
So moving on to the next slide regarding motivation, specifically the content theories. The content theories answer the question, what motivates us? Maslow and Alderfer came up with some ideas. They're very much in alignment. Maslow came up with 5 levels that you have to sort of progressively move up towards, from the physiological needs, which are the baseline needs, moving all the way up to self-actualization. And this idea that we can't think about personal growth or self-actualization until we are in a place where we are physically safe and socially secure in our personal relationships around us. Alderfer basically took what Maslow did and he sort of collapsed it into 3 categories as opposed to these 5 categories. And he said existence needs are important, relatedness needs are important, and growth needs are important. And all of these are things that motivate us, that drive us to behave in a particular way. When we want growth, we will seek out activities to grow. And we see this when we think about employee development in the workplace. With relatedness, again, when we're thinking about making a person-organization match and connecting someone to an organization, we're thinking about relatedness needs and how well they get along with individuals and what the social environment is going to be like and the culture is going to be like in our organization. And existence needs, this gets down to the basics of getting someone a job and getting them a paycheck that creates a living wage. So this has some impact on the staffing process and the kinds of people that we might choose to hire for our organization. Moving on to the next slide, we know that there's also theories like content theories, like Locke and Latham, and their goal-setting theories, where we help people to make specific attainable goals and provide them feedback regarding that attainment. And so content theories are basically arguing with Locke and Latham's theory that workers want to perform at a particular level and we have to work with them to create goals that they can attain. And we, again, this is part of the direction as we were discussing. Our direction theories, let me take a step back again and say that right. The Locke and Latham goal-setting theory is our method for giving direction when it comes to motivation, because we said motivation was arousal, direction, and intensity. So goal setting is part of the direction side of things and what we can do to give people an appropriate direction in which to focus their energies and their motivation when they're excited. The Hackman and Oldham is our job design or job characteristics model. It's how we can think about the way we design jobs in an intrinsic reward fashion. Extrinsic rewards are important, and we will get into those when we talk about expectancy theory. But the job design or job characteristics model really does get into the intrinsic rewards and how do we design jobs to maximize satisfaction with the jobs that they have. So moving to the next slide, which is a more colorful slide dealing with the job characteristics model, you can see that there are some color themes there, and I want you to pay attention to those. The pink work together, the blue work together, and the yellow work together, and they all lead to those outcomes, which are the green on the right-hand side. Our core job descriptions, core job dimensions, talk about 5 key dimensions that we need for jobs so that people are highly satisfied, will have high good quality work performance, and will have higher levels of motivation. And this is tapping into the intrinsic side of things. People need jobs that have a lot of variety. They want to have an identifiable task, a project that they're working on, and they want to know its significance. It's one thing to say you need to screw this light bulb in every day, but you need to know why that light bulb's important to the organization, why it needs to be done in this particular way, and what are the implications for what happens if you don't do that. So skill variety, task identity, and task significance are an additive function. They add up. The more that you can have of any of those, the more people are going to experience meaningful work. So our goal is, if people want meaningful work, if they want to be motivated, if they want to be excited about what they do, then we need to build up as much as is possible variety, identity, and significance to their jobs and to their tasks. In terms of the blue, the autonomy linkage, people need autonomy in the workplace, or at least some people need autonomy in the workplace. And you need autonomy in order for people to feel responsible for their job and for the outcomes of their job. So by creating situations where people get to have some degree of autonomy through self-managed work teams, where they get to make choices for themselves, that's an important aspect of job design. What's important for managers to know is that in order to have autonomy, in order for your workers to have autonomy, A, they need to be trained well. They need to be coached well. And most importantly, as we come back to this time and time again, they need trust. So trust is also essential to building a workplace that feels comfortable and responsible for their work outcomes. Lastly is the yellow, the feedback linkage, and we want jobs to have a lot of feedback. Feedback because people need to know how well they're doing on the job, and again, this ties into the performance management aspect of things, but people also want to know the outcome of their work. You know, you're working on a project, you want to see what the end result was. And think about the person who's working on the assembly line and they're responsible for putting the distributor in the car. And so the distributor gets installed, and then the next car comes along and another distributor gets put in, and they sort of never see what the outcome is. They never look at the whole car. They only think about it in terms of the distributor that they need to install in the car every single day. So they get that feedback when they can go into the parking lot and they can see the cars in the parking lot after they've been created. They get feedback on how well they performed when they look at the failure rate of how many distributors fail upon installation in the car. So they get feedback on the quality of their work too. And this is really important. People do want to know that they're doing well. And it's our imperative as managers, from the developmental side, from the coaching side, from the performance appraisal side, that we are providing them with this kind of feedback. Because without that kind of feedback, they're not going to continue to work at a high level. All right, moving on to our next slide, the process theories. We've got two basic theories of process. One is dealing with equity theory, and the other one deals with expectancy theory, and I'll go through both of those with you. Equity theory basically says we put forth effort of some sort. We make contributions, as it says there, our inputs. And we expect back from the organization some level of rewards, whatever that is, whether it's a job design issue, an intrinsic reward, or whether it's an extrinsic reward based on salary or benefits or perks. But either way, we expect a certain level of reward for our efforts, and it should be commensurate with the level of effort we put into that job and the level of contributions that we make to the organization. So we want to compare ourselves to a number of different others to make sure that that ratio of contributions to rewards is in alignment with the contributions and rewards of others in the organization, or other people that we know, or even ourselves in past experience. So how do we handle that? Well, basically what we do is we compare ourselves, for example, to ourselves in the past. You know, last year when I did this effort, I got this kind of reward. This year, I didn't get that reward, and how come? We could compare ourselves to a coworker, where we can basically say, oh, my coworker doesn't work as hard as I do. Why do they make more money than I do? Why do they get more time off? Why do they get better benefits? we can compare ourselves to a superior. My boss makes way more money than I think he or she should make, given how well they do in terms of supervising me. So it's not like you and your boss have to make the same amount of money for you to feel like that relationship, that ratio is out of alignment. Because it's a ratio that we're comparing, not really the raw numbers, the baseline numbers. We can also compare ourselves to someone in another organization. My friend who does this job in another organization gets paid twice as much money as I do. How come? Why is that? And so we can see that as an essence of unfair. When that ratio is out of alignment, when we compare ourselves to that other, whatever that other is, when that's out of alignment, we are then motivated to restore equity. We want to bring things back to an equitable situation. And we'll talk in class about some examples of that. Take you through an exercise of talking about it. The things to keep in mind with respect to restoring equity, sometimes it's about changing our perceptions of a situation, which is more psychological, where I suddenly have to kind of go, gee, maybe I'm perceiving this the wrong way. And that takes us back to our perceptual process where we realize that the way we've interpreted information and the way that we've organized it and put it together may be incorrect, that we need to go back to the perceptual process and think, how could I rearrange the way I think about this? So there's a psychological element for us to resolve that inequity that we face, but there's also a behavioral issue. I mean, I may have to realize that I've got to work harder to make more money, or I may realize that I'm never going to make as much money as someone else, even though I work harder than them, and I might slow down my work output. And again, I'll talk you through an example of that
in class.
In terms of the next slide, with respect to process theories, we're trying to get at how do we become motivated? Will a motivated worker become a high performer? And will that high performer become satisfied? This is our expanded expectancy model. And we will come back to this time and time again throughout the semester. And I'm going to take you through that step by step. Again, I have it color-coded for a reason so you understand how to interpret it. The yellow is the first part. Motivation theory basically argues that there are three things that contribute to the level of motivation that we feel. Our belief that if we put forth the effort, we can perform it. And this is what we call expectancy. That's the E to P ratio, the E to P relationship. If I put forth the effort, can I do the task? Then we have the instrumentality. If I perform the task, will I get a reward, whatever that reward might be? Now, I might get a reward, and that's fine. I might not. Then we move on to valence. What is the value of that reward to me? Do I like the reward? Will the reward be meaningful? And if it is meaningful, am I willing to then engage in the behavior? So this contributes to arousal. It also contributes to the maintenance of the reward, of the behaviors that we want when we thought about motivation theories. This is how we get people to not only engage, but to stay engaged, because we need to use our reward systems to maintain those high levels of performance over time. So, expectancy says, if I put forth the effort, can I perform it? I assess this for myself. Yes, I believe if I put forth the effort, I can perform this task. Instrumentality. If I perform, will the reward be there? Which means, do I like the company policies? Am I comfortable with what they're going to do for me to reward me? Doesn't mean I like the reward, but will I get a reward? Will I see some outcome from this? And then the valence of the rewards. How valuable is that reward to me? Now, this is what we call a multiplicative function, which means if any one of those is low, for example, let's say my expectancy is a perfect 1.0, because it's basically on a scale from 0 to 1. So my expectancy is a 1.0. I believe I can put forth the effort and I can do it. I believe I'll get a reward, so it's a 1.0 there. But how much do I value those rewards? The valence for the reward is pretty low, like a 0.1. So if you take 1 times 1 times 1.1, what do you end up with? You end up with 0.1. So it means no matter how much you believe you can do it, no matter how much you believe you're going to get a reward. If you don't like the reward, you're not going to be that motivated to do the job. So it's a three-pronged approach. So how does it fit in then to the rest of this model? Well, let me take you through it. Once we decide that we're motivated, as employees, we make the determination whether or not we're motivated. We look at the situation and we make the determination whether or not we're motivated. From there, we move on to what we call the motivation to performance linkage. How can we ensure that a good motivated worker will also be a good performer? Because motivation isn't enough, as we know. They need ability. So we need to have people who can do the job, whether or not they come in with the skills or whether or not we train them to have those skills. But a person has to have the raw ability to do something in order to be a good performer, regardless of how motivated they are. Secondarily, in order to be the best performer, ability is fine, motivation's fine, but if you don't have any clarity about what you're supposed to do, or if you don't have the resources to do your job, you're not also going to be able to be a good performer. So in order for a motivated worker to become a good performer, they also have to have the ability to do the job, and they need the support from the organization with resources, job descriptions, and general support from the organization to get that task done. Now, I've been in a situation where I've had the ability and I walked into the job motivated, but when the company continually told me there was no resources to support me, my performance waned, because if you're not going to give me the resources to support me, why should I put forth the effort? No need for me to do it anymore. So this sort of impacts that expectancy, whether or not if I put forth the effort, I'm actually going to be able to perform. If I don't feel like I'm getting the resources, or I don't have the ability, I'm not going to perform that well. And the expectancy feedback, it's a feedback loop. It goes back to expectancy and it decreases my expectancy. And then in time, the next time I'm faced with the situation, I'm going to remember that I didn't get the resources, and it's not likely that I'm going to be very motivated to perform the task. So that sort of explains the expectancy. Now, the next thing is the instrumentality. Can we get the rewards? And this brings us to the performance and intrinsic and extrinsic linkage. So a good performer, in order to feel instrumentality, needs to know that they can get the intrinsic and extrinsic rewards that are available to them. So with that, we know that job design can influence intrinsic motivation, as we talked about with the Hackman and Oldham job characteristics model from a few slides back. So the way that we design our jobs is going to impact whether or not people feel motivated, whether they get the appropriate feedback, whether or not they have meaningful work, whether or not they feel like they have the autonomy and the responsibility that they want. So job design influences that. Second, with extrinsic rewards, this all comes down to compensation policy and procedure and performance appraisals. So we need to make sure our company policies that are set up to administer these reward systems are also well done and done right. Assuming that we have a good job design and good company policies, people should feel instrumentality, that even if they don't like the rewards will be there, and that they feel like if they accomplish whatever they're going to do, the reward will come. Now, obviously, valence means that they have to like the rewards too, and that sort of takes us to that next linkage, because when there's good expectancy that I believe I can do it, when I believe I'll get a reward and I like the rewards that are given to me, and it's done fairly in an equitable way, I'm going to be satisfied. I'm going to like what I do very well, and I'm going to be excited to do that time and time again. I'll review this model with you when we come back into class, but I just want to make sure that you get how that information flows, and it's color-coded for a reason. Next and last aspect of motivation that we're going to talk about are the reinforcement theories, because it's not enough to get people's attention, get them excited to do it and to do the work, and to do the work only once. Our goal is that we want them doing this over the long haul. So how do we use our reward systems to reinforce the behaviors we want in the time frame that we want it, whether it's continuously or in this one moment? But we need to make sure that we are finding a way to get those behaviors in a way that we want them to be. And as you can see here, when it comes to operant conditioning, what we're looking for is either to encourage the behaviors to be acquired and maintained over a period of time, or whether we want them eliminated. If we want bad behaviors eliminated, clearly we have to do some sort of testing, for example, if it's drug testing, or we need to have a certain level of punishment for someone if they engage in a behavior that we find unacceptable. So our act of reinforcing is what we will use to motivate future behaviors, to help create a context for future behaviors. Our next slide then deals with the 4 methods by which we can do reinforcement. Number 1 is positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement is how people learn to perform behaviors that lead to a desired outcome, whatever that is. So we get the positive reinforcement. As they do it, they get a kudo, they get a pat on the back, they get a reward, whatever that reward system is, and encourages that behavior to be repeated. Punishment is when a behavior is exhibited, there's an undesirable consequence, and so in order to decrease an undesirable behavior, we present an undesirable consequence to the individual, so that they learn very quickly that if they don't want this undesirable consequence, they have to stop the undesirable behavior. Extinction is what happens when we no longer reinforce a particular behavior that we want, and so over time, the tool that by eliminating the tool that we use to reinforce the behavior that we want will start to disappear when people don't feel like there's a reward for it, or if we, for example, don't punish anymore, the behavior that we want disappears. So we have to be really careful to continue, not on a regular basis, but on an intermittent basis, to reinforce whatever behaviors we want, so that we don't have any problems with extinction. Next is negative reinforcement, is the process by which people learn to perform acts that lead to the removal of undesired events. Now, the difference here is that the difference in comparison to, say, positive reinforcement is with negative reinforcement, people aren't learning the behavior for the sake of learning the behavior. What we're doing with negative reinforcement is that we are basically teaching people to do what they need to do just to avoid the undesirable event. So it's like, I don't want to hear my mom complain about my chores anymore, so I'm going to do it. It's not because I've learned it, because I've learned the joy of doing my chores, or I take personal satisfaction in it, but I'm doing it because if I don't do it, I'm going to get grounded. I'm not going to be able to use the car, or any number of behaviors in that direction. So and those are just sort of a very simple and easy sort of teenage example. But again, the same thing with an organization. If my boss is a micromanager and he stands over my shoulder and he's continually hounding me, I'm going to get the project done quickly because I don't want my boss to hound me, as opposed to getting it done quickly because there's a joy or a satisfaction in doing it for its inherent value. So we're engaged in sort of 4 different tools for reinforcing behaviors. So if you go to the next one, there's a great table, I think, that kind of gives you a good sense of how these reinforcement theories basically work. So if you have any questions on that, bring that to class. The next slide is the reinforcement schedules. Obviously, we know that if you continually reinforce something, we lose the impact of the stimulus. If you think back to the perceptual process, and the perceptual process basically says, something that's unusual stands out, something that comes at us, irregularly, that doesn't fit a pattern will stand out. And so what happens with continuous reinforcement is we get used to it. It doesn't have an impact on us anymore. It is a constant stimulus, and it becomes just part of the background hum of our life. So if your boss every day says, oh, you're so good, you're so good, you're so good, but doesn't really differentiate between when you're good and when you're not so good, that you're so good, you're so good, you're so good reinforcement just doesn't have an impact anymore. So what we really want is, partial reinforcement. Partial reinforcement works a lot better. We can have interval schedules, and we can have ratio schedules. We can have a fixed interval, a variable interval, or a fixed ratio or a variable ratio. A fixed interval is where we know over a certain period of time a reward's going to happen, and that's like payday, right? We all know we don't get paid every day, like you maybe did in medieval times, where you walked up to your boss and you put your palm out and they'd give you your coin for the day for the work that you did. We have a contract, in essence, verbal or written, with the company. We know we're going to work for a period of time, and part of that is part of built into that contract is an agreement that, assuming that I come to work and I do my job, every 2 weeks or every month or every other month or whatever the schedule is, I'm going to get a paycheck. Then we have a variable schedule, which we don't know when the reward is going to occur, or the test or whatever is going to occur. So you can have a variable interval. And variable intervals can be good because you can kind of give surprise rewards to people, and they don't know when it's coming, when it can be expected, but it shows up and it can have a very good effect. That's how pop quizzes work for students in school. Is if you want students to engage in a certain behavior, staying on top of, their homework and their readings the way they're supposed to. If you have pop quizzes, they're more likely to stay on top of the work in order to ensure that they're not surprised and unprepared when the quiz occurs. A variable interval schedule is how drug testing works. You never know when the drug test is going to happen. It could happen tomorrow, it could happen a month from now. So you can't say, well, I know drug tests are tomorrow, so I won't engage in drugs for, a certain period of time, so it won't be in my system. The goal is to surprise someone, and to see where that leads you. A fixed ratio schedule is like a sales commission, where we know a certain number of responses and ends up with a certain level of reward. So if you sell $10,000 of something, you get one reward. If you sell $15,000, you get a slightly higher reward. If you sell 20, even higher, slightly higher reward from that. And the whole point is that we know the number of responses or the number of widgets or the number of things that we need to do in order to trigger a particular reward. A variable ratio schedule is one that says we don't know when, what the amount will be. And the variable ratio is a bit more challenging in the workplace because people want some degree of predictability with respect to their reward, whether it's a fixed interval or a fixed ratio. But the variable ratio may be something that we do in order to provide feedback for people. We may vary the number of sales calls that people do, or customer service calls that they make, or cold calls that they do, and we may vary them and pop our head in and to hear how they handle the telephone call. And so it's a variable ratio, and there's no guarantee of when that's going to be. So if you make, I might decide after 20 calls I'm going to listen in on your phone call, and maybe the next time it'll be 30 calls, and the next time it'll be 10 calls. So you never know when that supervisor is going to be listening in on that telemarketing call to find out if you're speaking the script the way you need to be speaking it and things like that. Once you use a fixed ratio, then people know when to expect you to pop in. So you really need a variable ratio in order to make that work. And it's like slot machines, right? We know slot machines, in casinos are programmed to give a variable response, that they're not going to give a predictable every 10 pulls it's going to give a reward. It's going to vary over time with the number of pulls. And of course we know that companies can program these at varied rates, and the ones on the outside of aisles will pay out at a higher ratio than the slot machines on the inside of those rows. And why do they do that? Well, because if
the ones on the outside, as you're walking down aisles and you see this one's paying out, you might go in a couple of seats to find a seat to sit down and go, well, that one's paying out, so maybe this row, because we're always trying to find patterns, right? We're always trying to find patterns to get that reward. We want to go and go into an inside seat, and then we want to start pulling the arm, and we want that reward as well. And then we realize that, we'll never get the reward at the same rate as those on the outside of the aisles. And so we'll keep pulling and pulling and hoping that eventually, we'll hit a reward. And so the thing is, our brains are always programmed to try to find patterns, as I was just referring to before. The dopamine in our brain wants us to find patterns, and so the variable ratio, we keep trying to predict when the new thing is going to happen. So we keep trying and we keep hoping that we'll figure out the pattern, and then eventually that reward comes to us. So anyway, we have just covered, all the motivation theories. Specifically, we've addressed in this last slide, all the reinforcement theories and how they basically work. So bring your questions to class, and I'll see you then. Bye.